Thank you very much to all our speakers. I would like to hear from each panelist shortly about what's your take on institutional reforms in Malaysia after 100 days. Where are we, and where can we do better for these reforms? So maybe Shahril first.
First of all, it's only right and proper for me to say that many things that Pakatan Harapan government has done over the first 100 or so days have been credible, have been noteworthy. Things around, I see a couple of people clapping. Things around, for example, the chairmanship of the PAC coming from the opposition MP. I think that's a big deal. The media freedoms, or at least apparent media freedoms. I was part of the by-election, not the current one so much, but the one previously where we actually fielded a candidate. And it was, very pleasing to me as a young Malaysian to see that TV3, I think RTM as well, also covered BN events, which never would have happened in the previous regime or the previous administrations. Not just the previous administration, including the administration of the 4th PM, which was also the 7th PM. So I think some of these things have shown there's some seriousness on the part of government to stay true to the reform agenda, which was at least in part responsible for their victory. But these successes or these indications, I think, slightly worry me on one count. They are not yet institutionalized. So I think, to be true to the topic, the question or the challenge for the government with their 5-year mandate, we're past this 100-day thing, within their 5-year mandate, how do you ensure that these things become institutionalized and not just by convention, or worse, just something that you do in the heat of the moment, or while there's goodwill within the electorate? That is to say, how do you make sure that constitutionally the PAC chairmanship will always be an opposition position? The other thing that slightly concerns me is that these achievements or these indications also sit alongside some things that appear to go against the reformist kind of spirit that Pakatan claims to hold. The CEP is one glaring example of this, in my opinion. First, it was meant to be 100 days, and then it's not, then it is again, and we're not quite sure what's happening. But more to the point, I think the question of whether it was just meant to be advisory or more than that, that's where a couple of things that's happened over the first 100 days have caused a bit of concern. You've got stuff around, for example, things that they haven't, or Pakatan hasn't really pushed through. This idea of 2 terms limit for premiership. So I don't know what's the game plan there. Not much has been said about it. So I guess in brief, you've got a couple of good things. You've got things that appear to go in reverse, and some things that are left unsaid, or no real action, at least nothing apparent from our side. So we've got all this mixed bag, and what is key, I think, is while we got to give time to the new government, while it's just been 100 days, the mandate's for 5 years, there's never been a time, at least my understanding of Malaysia's history, where a government has this amount of goodwill to do all these things that would have been difficult under the BN administration. You can dislike the BN administration or successive administrations before this current one. But the point is, it was always difficult for people, I don't want to toot my own horn or whatever, but it was always going to be difficult for people like me, because I'm on that side, and that side was never known or never branded as reformist. But these guys, part of the reason they were voted in was because of the reform agenda. So in my mind, you wouldn't be going against the tide. Whereas previously, hopefully not in the future, previously when you were in the BN administration, you will always go up against certain conventions that were not necessarily as reformist as you want to be. What we hope in the next couple of years is that it's a more, more one-way traffic to all of us who claim ourselves to be Democrats. Thank you.
The first point I would like to make is in terms of our institutional reform agenda concerning the office and the powers of the Prime Minister. I think it was very clear that one of the most important things we had to do was to significantly reallocate the powers of the Prime Minister's office that had been increased too much over the past 10 to 15 years. And you could see over the past 3 months, over the past 100 days, that this has been done. starting with most significantly the separation of the role of the Prime Minister as well as the Minister of Finance. This was something that was done as one of the first priorities of the government, and having had the opportunity to be the special officer to the Minister of Finance and having seen certain files that were signed by the previous Minister of Finance, you can really understand the necessity for the separation of powers on this particular front, because it's subject to great and really terrible abuse, of which some of the scandals that you are aware of are just some of it. There are others that have been revealed by the Minister of Finance, such as the GST refunds or the lack thereof, the LHDN refunds or the lack thereof. And this is one of the important reform agendas. In terms of the Office of the Prime Minister, you'll be able to see now that some of the functions that should have been rightly under the Ministry of Transport, but were somehow seconded or usurped by the Prime Minister's office in the past, have now been returned to the Ministry of Transport. Things like, for example, public transport policy, the abolishment of the Land Transport Authority was done as one of the first bills, one of the early bills that was passed in Parliament. The second thing that I want to talk about is in the area of reforming elections, the process of elections as well as the institution of the Election Commission. In terms of the process, we can see a very clear-cut difference. After the 9th of May, unfortunately, we've had the situation of having to call 3 by-elections, all in the state of Selangor. But we can see the effects already, the positive effects in terms of the Election Commission being much more open to scrutiny. For example, they have invited independent observers to be part and parcel of the electoral process. So much so that now, I've been having debates with them and asking them, look, in the morning, if let's say I want to drive to work, but if I want to stop and help out in the campaign, does that mean that I can't use my official car? I have to go back and drive my own car first, and then after that switch to another car. So these are the kind of debates which we're having, which I think would not have been had before. And we can see that we are trying very hard, especially since it's in Selangor. We have government at the state as well as at the federal level. We're trying very hard to keep to what we used to, what we promised before when we were in the opposition, meaning no announcements of projects during the by-election period, and not having events which contain the element of bribing the voters or incentivizing the voters. But a lot more needs to be done. For example, I take note of the fact that there has been an electoral reform committee announced, but currently the power of this reform committee actually sits outside Parliament. My preference would be for it to be inside Parliament, and many of my colleagues, backbenchers, have also expressed this preference because the Election Commission is supposed to now directly report to Parliament. The mechanism has not been worked out together with the reporting mechanism of some of the other institutions that are supposed to be, that we are committed to making more independent, such as the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. All these, I think about 8 or 9 commissions are supposed to report independently to Parliament. So I do hope that there can be a larger role for Parliament to play in terms of monitoring and also holding these independent institutions to account. The third point I want to make is in regards to the abolishment of oppressive laws. I think we can be proud of the fact that the anti-fake news bill was abolished at this parliamentary sitting, and ideally for some of the more oppressive laws that we've promised to abolish, we should abolish in the very near term.
Jadi 1, 2, 3. Lagi sekali.